Good afternoon, students. Today I am going to teach you something in financial management subject. The topic I have been assigned for today is sources of funds. So if you look at the need for funds, it's obvious that every business requires money. For an existing business or for a new business, money is required. For a new business, probably it requires a huge amount of money for establishment of plant, the production facilities, the machines, and it requires huge amount of funding. Whereas an existing company, an existing firm may require cash or money for expansion purpose. It wants to buy a new machine or wants to set up a new plant, or it needs cash for day-to-day operational expenses. So every business, new, existing, they all need money. And in a country like India, which is developing, money is the most scarce resource. So we know that men, machine, money and material are the four factors of production, so which go into any business. Money is most important because it is scarcely available. Right. So having said that, money is required. In terms of finance, we call the money required for business as capital. The term capital refers to the money required for running a business. The capital can be broken down into two parts, long-term and short-term capital. Long-term capital refers to the funds required for purchase of fixed assets, the assets that will have a lifetime much more than 1 year, and they will be working for the organization for a longer period of time. So such assets like buildings, land, machinery, they are called as fixed assets, and the amount of money that goes into fixed assets is called as long-term capital. Whereas for meeting the day-to-day expenses, maybe for payment of wages, payment for raw material, payment for power, fuel, and payments for transport, etc. So all these payments, they are called as short-term capital requirements, and typically in financial jargon we call them as working capital. So every business requires long-term capital as well as working capital. So long-term capital refers to a capital which stays with the organization for a longer period of time, more than a year, and working capital, typically the requirement is for a short period of time. Now the question is, where does the money come from? So we need capital, both long-term and short-term, but where does we get these funds from? So based on different criteria, we have classified the sources of funds into different categories. Let's briefly look at each of them. On the basis of time period, we can divide the sources, the requirement of the sources of funds into long-term, medium-term, and short-term. So long-term refers to greater than 5 years, medium-term refers to less than 5 years to up to 3 years, and short-term refers to 1 year and less. So if your requirement for funds is less than 1 year, we call them as short-term funds, and if your requirement for funds is for a medium term ranging from 2 to 5 years, we call it as medium-term fund, and if it is for more than 5 years, then we call it as a long-term capital. And we have sources that can get you long-term capital, that can give you medium-term capital, or that can give you short-term capital. So based on the time period for which the business requires the funds, we can classify them into long-term, medium-term, and short-term. For example, equity shares, retained earnings, preference shares, debentures, loans from financial institutions and banks, they can all be called as long-term sources of funds. We'll come to each one of them in detail after we classify them first. Whereas medium-term loans from banks, the company can borrow loans from banks for a medium term, as well it can issue fixed deposits in the medium term, or it can get loans from financial institutions. Similarly, for short term, trade credit, factoring, bank financing, or commercial paper. These are the different sources of short-term financing. So this is one classification based on the term. The second classification is based on the ownership. Whose money is it? Is it the owner's money or is it the borrowed money? If it is owner's fund, it need not be repaid. If it is borrowed fund, it has to be repaid. That's the basic difference. So under the owner's funds, we have equity share capital as well as retained earnings. Under the borrowed funds, all sorts of borrowings that a company makes, maybe in the form of debentures, loans, trade credit, deposits, leasing, factoring, etc., etc. So all those sources which are to be repaid come under borrowed funds, and all those sources of fund which come from the owners of the company, they are called the owner's fund, or typically equity and resource. The third classification is based on the source of generation. Where do we get these funds from? Internal sources or external sources? Internal sources being equity share capital and retained earnings, and external sources being all other forms of funding that we get from outsiders. So basically we have three different bases for classification, and based on that we have different sources of funds. Now let us move on to each source of fund, learn what is it, what are the characteristics of it, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of each source of fund from the business point of view. The first and the foremost is equity shares. So you all know that every company has equity share capital. Equity share capital refers to the owner's fund. Let us suppose that some 5 or 6 people together have an idea to start a new business which requires, say, 100 crores of capital. So these 5-6 people, they work on the project, they prepare the project, they identify the business idea, they identify from where they get the raw materials, the technology, and where will they establish the plant and how much cost it's going to incur to establish the plant and run the business, and where is the market for this product. So where can they sell it, how much can they sell in the coming years, at what price they can sell, and what profit they can make. So they come up with a project report, and once they are convinced that this venture is going to be profitable, then they get into action. The first and foremost thing required is raising that 100 crores of capital, so which forms the basis for starting the business. So 4 or 5 people may not be able to invest such a huge capital. So what they do is they break it into parts. Say 100 crores is broken down into 2 parts. 50 crores will come from the shareholders or their own money, and remaining 50 crores they will borrow from financial institutions or banks. Right. The 50 crores they have decided will be owners' money. So out of that, probably they'll contribute 10 crores, all five of them put together, and the remaining 40 crores has to come from others. So they will sell the idea that they have to other people and ask them to become their partners. So because we have a large number of people there, we don't call them as partners, but we call them as shareholders. This 50 crores will be divided into small part, and each part is called a share. Supposing that the company divides the 50 crores into 5 crore shares, each valued at 10 rupees. So these 5 crore shares will be offered to the public for subscription. So they will make a public offer. It is called a public offer through a process which is to be approved by SEBI, the Securities Exchange Board of India, and through the help of merchant bankers. So these shares will be offered to the public, and the public will look into the project report that these people have prepared, and once they get convinced, they will apply for the shares. So these people are called investors who have got savings, and they apply for the shares thinking that this company will do better in future, will be financially profitable, and the share price will go up in future so that they'll get more money for their investment. Right. So investors apply for the shares, and company collects their money and issues them share certificates. So these people from now on are called shareholders. They are typically part owners of the company. So these shares are called equity shares or ordinary equity shares. So let's look at the features of equity shares. Equity shareholders are the owners of the company, and they have typically the voting rights. If you look at the constitution of the company, companies run on a democratic lines. All the shareholders collectively they take decisions. For that, there will be a meeting called annual general meeting, so for which all the shareholders are invited, and these shareholders during this AGM will elect a set of people called directors. So directors are elected by the shareholders through the voting process. So if I am a shareholder of a company with some 10,000 shares, I'll have 10,000 votes. So I can cast my vote to any of my favorite candidate, and that person will become the director. So the board of directors will then elect a person as the chairman, and they'll appoint one person as the managing director. It is quite similar to our parliament, the president and the prime minister. Board of directors is our parliament. President is the chairman of the board, and prime minister is the managing director of the company. So board takes the strategic level decisions. All important decisions are to be approved by the board, and once these decisions are approved, the strategies are formulated by the board. It is the duty of the managing director to implement or execute those strategies, and that's why some companies also call the MD as Chief Executive Officer. Right. So this is how democratically the company is run, and the power for electing the representatives lies with the shareholders. Right. So what do the shareholder get in return for his investment? Equity shareholders are entitled for dividends. What dividend means? See, every company gets profits at the end of year, at the end of financial year. When we close accounts, we come to know how much profit the company has made. And this profit can be distributed to the shareholders. Right? This money belongs to the shareholders because they have invested the money, the capital. So whatever profit has come, it has to be shared among all the shareholders. So the part of profit which a shareholder gets is called dividend. So for your investment in the share capital, the return that you get is dividend from the company. How much you get, it depends on how much profit the company makes. And it is not compulsory that when a company makes profits, it has to give it to the shareholders as dividend, because there is a decision involved. And the profit the company makes can be held as a reserve for future investment, or it can be distributed to the shareholders as dividend. So this decision depends upon the management's criteria, like whether they want to go for reinvestment or they want to distribute it to the shareholders, depending on the requirements of the shareholders as well as the requirements of capital for the company in the future. So that means that only when the company gets profit, the shareholders may get dividend. Underline the word may, because you may not even get the dividend, even though there is a profit. So it is very, very uncertain how much dividend you get, whether you get it or not, that's all uncertain. And if the company gets losses, then shareholder doesn't get any dividend at all. So there is no guaranteed payment of dividend. So dividend depends on the profit the company makes and the decision of the company's management. So why do shareholders or investors purchase shares when there is so much of uncertainty around it? The logic here is, if your decision is right, the company makes decent profits and its business grows in the future, the share price gets multiplied. As you know, the shares are getting traded on the stock exchanges. So there is a price for the share in the stock market, and this price depends on the company's profitability, company's financial conditions, company's earning capacity. So if the company is doing good, the company's financials are sound, the share price will multiply in the stock market, and the shareholder, if he wants, can sell the shares to others and get a huge profit. Okay, so the investors buy the shares with a view to get dividend from the company, as well as sell it at a future date at a higher price to make huge profits. Okay, so equity shares are transferable in nature, so shareholder can freely sell it to others and transfer it to the others for a consideration. Okay, so ultimately equity shareholders are the real owners of the company. They take the profits as well the losses, and payment of dividend is not guaranteed, so there is a risk always involved in equity shares. Uncertainty or risk, how much we get, whether the share price will go up or come down, that's uncertain. Whether the company pays dividends or not, that is also uncertain. So equity shares are the most riskiest investments. At the same time, if the company does good, there is no upper limit for the share price. The share price can multiply and give you huge returns. So if you look at the stock markets, probably the shares which have been issued for rupees 10 some 10-20 years ago are trading now in thousands. So giving the returns 100 times or 1000 times than what the investor has made. So such huge potential for making profits is available in the stock markets, and that is why equity investments are considered to be the best and the riskiest. So only informed investors, those who have knowledge of how the company is run and what may happen to the company in future. So if you can judge that, you can invest in the equity shares.